The world notices the biggest gifts first, but sometimes the smallest one is the only thing that reaches a lonely heart. The grand ballroom inside the sterling foundation glowed beneath towering crystal chandeliers as hundreds of distinguished guests gathered for the annual Children's Future Gala, one of the most prestigious charity events in Ohio. Every polished marble floor reflected elegant evening gowns, tailored tuxedos, and the quiet confidence of people whose names regularly appeared on magazine covers and business headlines. Cameras flashed every few seconds while reporters competed for the perfect photograph of America's youngest billionaire chief executive officer, Victoria Sterling. She greeted each donor with flawless professionalism, accepting priceless paintings, rare jewelry, handcrafted sculptures, and generous charitable pledges worth millions of dollars. Every gift arrived wrapped in luxurious paper, accompanied by polished speeches carefully designed to impress. Victoria thanked each guest with the same graceful smile, yet behind her composed blue eyes rested a silence no photographer could capture. Across the crowded ballroom, Ethan Brooks stood near the back wall wearing the only navy blazer he owned, pressed carefully the night before until every wrinkle had disappeared. At 39 years old, the white American single father had spent the past 8 years raising his daughter alone after losing his wife far too early. During the week, he repaired engines at a neighborhood auto shop outside Columbus, and today he had volunteered to help set up tables long before the first limousine arrived. Recognition had never interested him. He simply believed that kindness was easier to practice than to explain. Standing beside him, 8-year-old Lily Brooks hugged a tiny blue paper box with both hands. The uneven white string tied around it had already loosened twice that morning before she patiently tied it again herself. Inside rested a small handmade bracelet woven from blue and white yarn together with a simple drawing folded into careful squares. Ethan looked down and smiled gently. "Are you still thinking about giving it away?" Lily nodded. "Yes. Do you know who will receive it?" She looked across the ballroom toward Victoria without saying anything. Ethan followed her gaze before quietly asking, "Why her?" Lily answered with complete innocence. "Everybody keeps looking at her clothes, but nobody looks at her face." Ethan remained silent for a moment. Then he placed his hand lightly on her shoulder. "If your heart tells you to be kind, never let someone else's opinion stop you." Lily smiled, took a slow breath, and slipped into the crowd. Wealthy guests barely noticed the little girl weaving carefully between polished dress shoes and flowing evening gowns. A few people frowned as she squeezed past them, assuming she had wandered into the wrong place. One woman glanced at the tiny paper package and smiled politely before turning back to her conversation about investments. Security watched Lily approach the center of the ballroom, but quickly realized she carried nothing more than a child's handmade gift. At that exact moment, Victoria accepted another velvet box containing an expensive diamond necklace. As photographers raised their cameras once again, Lily gently tugged at the sleeve of Victoria's ivory jacket. Victoria turned, expecting another greeting from an influential donor. Instead, she found herself looking into the bright blue eyes of a little girl holding out a tiny paper box with trembling hands. "I made this for you," Lily whispered softly, "because I think everybody should have something that was made with love." For the first time that evening, Victoria forgot the cameras, the speeches, the applause, and every priceless gift surrounding her. She stared only at the little paper box resting between the child's hands, and without understanding why, her carefully practiced smile quietly disappeared. Victoria accepted the tiny paper box with both hands as though it were made of fragile glass instead of folded construction paper. Around her, conversations softened into curious whispers, yet she barely noticed them. Her fingers rested on the uneven white string while she looked back at Lily, whose hopeful smile carried none of the calculation she had grown accustomed to seeing in boardrooms and charity galas. Ethan gave his daughter an encouraging nod from across the ballroom, never stepping forward to draw attention to himself. He had always believed that kindness lost something precious the moment it expected applause. That belief had not appeared overnight. It had been built through years of ordinary mornings that few people would ever consider remarkable. Every weekday began before 6 o'clock. Ethan would quietly start the coffee maker, prepare pancakes or scrambled eggs, pack Lily's lunch, and make sure her favorite apple slices stayed cold inside a small insulated container. Before leaving for school, Lily always placed one colorful drawing on the refrigerator because she said every home deserved fresh artwork. Ethan never removed a single one. The older drawings simply filled another wall until their little kitchen became a gallery of childhood memories. After dropping Lily off, he drove his aging blue pickup truck to Brooks Auto Repair, a neighborhood garage where he had worked since he was 23 years old. Engines, transmissions, brake pads, and oil changes paid the bills, but Ethan often believed he repaired more than vehicles. He listened patiently when elderly customers spoke about their grandchildren. He explained repairs in simple language without making anyone feel embarrassed. If someone struggled to pay, he quietly found practical solutions rather than adding pressure. His co-workers often joked that he would never become rich because he cared too much about people. Ethan always answered with the same gentle smile. Money helps people live, he would say. Respect helps people breathe. Lily absorbed those lessons the way children naturally absorb sunlight on a warm afternoon. She watched her father thank grocery store cashiers by name, return abandoned shopping carts without being asked, and wave at crossing guards every school morning. None of those habits seemed important by themselves, but together they became the language of the home they shared. One rainy Saturday, several months earlier, Lily had found leftover blue and white yarn inside an old craft box that had belonged to her late mother. She asked Ethan to teach her how to braid it. He laughed softly because he had never braided anything before. So they watched a beginner's craft video together, made several crooked attempts, and celebrated every tiny improvement as though they had mastered a complicated art. The finished bracelet was imperfect, with uneven knots and loose threads that refused to stay perfectly straight. Lily examined it carefully before smiling. It looks happier because it is not perfect. Ethan kissed the top of her head and replied, "The best things usually are." When the invitation arrived asking volunteers from the neighborhood to assist at the Sterling Foundation Gala, Ethan agreed immediately. He never imagined they would stand only a few feet away from one of the most recognized business leaders in America. He certainly never imagined his daughter would choose to bring the bracelet with her. As Victoria continued holding the tiny paper box in the center of the glittering ballroom, surrounded by gifts worth fortunes, she realized she could not remember the last time anyone had offered her something that had clearly taken more love than money to create. Victoria loosened the white string with slow, careful movements that surprised even herself. The ballroom remained beautifully decorated. The orchestra continued playing soft classical music, and conversations gradually returned around her, yet everything sounded strangely distant. She opened the small paper box and discovered the blue and white bracelet resting on a bed of neatly folded tissue paper beside a drawing made with colored pencils. The picture showed 3 people standing beneath a bright sun, smiling in front of a little house with flowers growing beside the porch. Above them, written in careful block letters, were the words, "Everybody deserves to feel like they belong." Victoria stared at the drawing much longer than anyone expected. Her fingertips trembled almost imperceptibly as she lifted the bracelet from the box. It was uneven. Some knots were tighter than others. A few loose threads extended farther than they should have. By every expensive standard surrounding her, it was imperfect. Yet something inside her quietly insisted. That was the most beautiful gift she had touched in years. She looked at Lily. "Did you really make this yourself?" Lily nodded proudly. "My daddy helped me learn, but I tied most of it." Victoria smiled softly. "Why did you choose these colors?" Lily answered without hesitation. "Blue feels peaceful, and white reminds me that everybody gets another chance." The words settled gently inside Victoria's heart. She lowered her eyes toward the bracelet again, and memories she had carefully buried beneath decades of achievement slowly returned. She remembered sitting at a small kitchen table when she was about Lily's age while her own mother patiently taught her how to braid colorful pieces of yarn on rainy afternoons. They had laughed whenever the knots became tangled because her mother always said that beautiful things took patience instead of perfection. Victoria had not thought about those afternoons in many years. Life had become a constant series of meetings, presentations, acquisitions, interviews, flights, and decisions that affected thousands of employees. Every calendar reminder pushed another personal memory farther away. Success had filled every empty hour, but somehow it had never filled the quiet places inside her heart. She realized that no one had given her something handmade since her mother passed away. Every birthday, every holiday, every corporate celebration had arrived with luxury boxes, expensive jewelry, rare artwork, and elegant handwritten notes from people who admired her accomplishments. Very few remembered the woman behind the headlines. Fewer still asked whether she felt lonely. Victoria carefully slipped the bracelet around her wrist. It fit almost perfectly despite its simple construction. Several guests exchanged puzzled glances, wondering why one of the wealthiest women in America would choose a child's handmade bracelet over the diamond necklace resting unopened on the nearby display table. A member of her executive team quietly approached and whispered, "Your acceptance speech begins in 3 minutes." Victoria nodded politely without taking her eyes off Lily. Then she knelt until they were looking at one another at the same height. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentler than anyone in the ballroom had ever heard during a business meeting. "I think this may be the nicest gift I have ever received." Lily smiled as though the answer had been completely obvious all along. Ethan watched the exchange from across the room with quiet gratitude, believing the evening had already given them more than enough. None of them realized that this small moment, witnessed by hundreds, yet fully understood by almost no one, had quietly begun changing 3 lives forever. The applause that followed Victoria's acceptance speech sounded louder than ever, yet she heard almost none of it. Standing behind the polished podium, she thanked the generous supporters, spoke about investing in children's futures, and shared the foundation's goals for the coming year with the same confidence that had earned the respect of investors across the country. Every sentence was polished, every pause perfectly timed, but throughout the entire speech her fingers continued touching the handmade bracelet resting gently around her wrist. Several guests noticed it immediately. Some smiled with quiet curiosity, while others whispered to one another, unable to understand why such a simple object remained more important than the expensive gifts surrounding her. When the formal program finally ended, photographers gathered near the ballroom entrance hoping for one last picture before Victoria departed. Instead of leaving immediately, she politely excused herself from another conversation and walked toward the volunteer area where folding tables were already being cleared. Ethan was quietly stacking empty serving trays while Lily carefully collected and used children's activity books into neat piles. Neither of them expected the chief executive officer herself to approach. Victoria smiled warmly before speaking. "May I help for a few minutes?" Ethan looked surprised, but answered with his usual calm kindness. "Of course. There's always room for one more pair of hands." Without hesitation, Victoria began carrying lightweight boxes beside them. No reporters followed. No cameras flashed. For the first time that evening, she experienced a few peaceful minutes without anyone asking for a photograph, a signature, or a business decision. Lily looked up with innocent curiosity. "Do you always work after everybody goes home?" Victoria laughed softly. "Sometimes it feels that way." Lily tilted her head. "My daddy says people need rest so they can keep being kind tomorrow." Ethan smiled with gentle embarrassment. "She remembers everything I say." Victoria looked toward him with genuine admiration. "That tells me she has been listening to the right person." They continued working together until the ballroom became almost empty. The luxurious decorations that had seemed so impressive only hours earlier now looked strangely ordinary beside the quiet teamwork of 3 people folding tablecloths and carrying small boxes. As they finished, Victoria noticed a faded family photograph tucked inside Ethan's wallet when he reached for his truck keys. She recognized his late wife standing beside him and a much younger Lily. Ethan quickly returned the photograph without drawing attention to it, but Victoria had already seen the tenderness in his expression. She did not ask questions. Some stories deserved respect before curiosity. Outside, the cool Ohio evening welcomed them with a gentle autumn breeze. Volunteers loaded supplies into pickup trucks while guests climbed into waiting luxury sedans. The contrast between those two worlds no longer seemed as large to Victoria as it had earlier that day. Before Ethan and Lily prepared to leave, Victoria removed a small business card from her purse. She hesitated for a brief moment before handing it to Ethan. "If you ever need anything, or if Lily would like to visit our children's education center, please call me directly." Ethan accepted the card with quiet gratitude, but without excitement or expectation. "Thank you. That is generous." Lily waved enthusiastically. "Do not forget to wear your bracelet." Victoria looked down at the blue and white threads around her wrist and smiled in a way that felt completely natural. "I do not think I could take it off even if I wanted to." As Ethan's aging blue pickup truck disappeared beyond the parking lot, Victoria remained, standing beneath the warm lights of the foundation entrance, watching until the taillights vanished into the night, feeling for the first time in many years that something truly valuable had entered her life without asking for anything in return. The following Monday began like every other Monday at Brooks Auto Repair, with the familiar sound of rolling garage doors, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the small office, and customers arriving before 8 o'clock, hoping to start their week without unexpected car trouble. Ethan greeted each person with the same steady smile that had quietly become part of the neighborhood. He never hurried anyone's questions, even when the repair schedule was completely full. Lily sat at a small wooden desk in the corner before school, finishing her homework while occasionally coloring another picture with the same careful attention she had given the bracelet. Life seemed to have returned to its comfortable rhythm, yet somewhere across the city another routine had begun to change. Victoria entered Sterling Global Headquarters wearing her usual ivory business suit, but something about her presence felt noticeably different. During the morning executive meeting, financial reports filled the large presentation screens while department leaders discussed expansion plans and quarterly goals. Normally, Victoria noticed every detail, but that morning her attention wandered more than once to the blue and white bracelet still resting around her wrist. One executive politely commented that it looked unusual beside such an elegant watch. Victoria smiled gently before replying, "It reminds me what success is supposed to be for." No one asked another question. Later that afternoon, after finishing several interviews and approving a long list of decisions, Victoria found herself opening the small paper, drawing once again inside her private office. She studied the smiling family beneath the bright yellow sun and quietly repeated the words written across the top. Everybody deserves to feel like they belong. She realized that she knew almost nothing about the little family that had given her the most meaningful gift she had received in years. She did not want a background report prepared by assistants or a file collected by investigators. She wanted to understand them the ordinary way, through real conversations and honest observation. 2 days later, after finishing an early meeting, Victoria left her chauffeur behind and drove herself across Columbus in a simple navy sweater and blue jeans. She parked several buildings away from Brooks Auto Repair, so no one would recognize her immediately. Standing quietly across the street with a cup of coffee from a nearby cafe, she watched the garage come alive. Ethan greeted every customer by name whenever he could. He patiently explained repairs to a young college student worried about expenses, helped an elderly veteran carry groceries from his trunk before inspecting the vehicle, and even stopped working for several minutes to rescue a frightened kitten that had wandered beneath a parked pickup truck. Nobody applauded those small acts. Nobody recorded them for social media. They simply happened because that was the kind of man he had chosen to become. Victoria remained there much longer than she had planned. She noticed that people trusted Ethan long before they trusted his repair estimates. They smiled when they arrived and smiled again when they left. Money changed hands, but respect always arrived first. Just before noon, Lily stepped out of the garage carrying 3 paper lunch bags. She handed one to her father, another to an older mechanic, and kept the smallest one for herself. Then she looked toward the sidewalk and unexpectedly noticed Victoria standing across the street. Her face immediately brightened. She waved with both hands as though greeting an old friend. Ethan followed his daughter's gaze, recognized Victoria, and looked genuinely surprised. Victoria hesitated for only a moment before smiling back, realizing that for the first time in many years she was not visiting a place because business required it, but because her heart had quietly led her there. Victoria crossed the street with an easy smile that felt unfamiliar after years of carefully managed public appearances. Lily ran forward first, stopping just in front of her with the cheerful confidence only a child could possess. "I knew you would wear it again," she said, pointing proudly at the blue and white bracelet. Victoria glanced down at her wrist before answering with complete honesty. "I have worn it every day." Ethan stepped forward, wiping his hands with a clean shop towel before extending a welcoming hand. "It is nice to see you again. We were not expecting company." Victoria laughed softly. "Neither was I, if I'm being honest." She admitted that she had been driving nearby after a meeting and decided to stop when she remembered the garage. Ethan did not question the explanation. He simply invited her inside as naturally as he would welcome any neighbor. The repair shop was clean, bright, and filled with the steady rhythm of ordinary work. Toolboxes stood neatly organized, workbenches were carefully maintained, and every mechanic greeted customers with respect. Victoria noticed that Ethan thanked his co-workers as often as they thanked him. Leadership, she realized, did not always require a corner office. Around noon, Lily unfolded the 3 paper lunch bags on a small picnic table beside the garage. "We packed extra today," she announced with a grin. "Would you like to eat with us?" Victoria hesitated for only a heartbeat before accepting. It had been years since anyone had invited her to lunch without discussing contracts, investments, or business opportunities. The meal was wonderfully simple. Turkey sandwiches, apple slices, homemade oatmeal cookies, and cold lemonade rested on the weathered wooden table beneath colorful autumn trees. There were no expensive menus, no reserved dining rooms, and no carefully planned conversations. They spoke about favorite books, school projects, old family recipes, and the changing leaves covering the neighborhood sidewalks. Lily described her dream of planting a community flower garden where everyone could sit together. Ethan smiled while listening more than speaking, occasionally adding a quiet joke that made both Lily and Victoria laugh. For nearly an hour, Victoria forgot the endless notifications waiting on her phone inside the car. Twice it vibrated with incoming calls from the corporate office. Twice she gently silenced it without looking at the screen. Ethan noticed but said nothing. He respected the silence as much as conversation. Before returning to work, Lily reached into her backpack and pulled out another drawing. It showed 3 people sitting around a picnic table beneath bright orange trees. She handed it to Victoria with complete confidence. "Now it is real," she said. Victoria looked at the drawing before glancing around the little table where they had just shared lunch. She smiled, realizing the child had already included her as though she naturally belonged there. A quiet warmth settled inside her heart, one that no award ceremony or financial success had ever created. As the afternoon continued, Victoria helped sweep the front sidewalk while Ethan finished replacing brake pads on a customer's truck. Several neighbors walked past and greeted Ethan by name, offering warm smiles to Victoria without recognizing one of the country's most influential business leaders. She found the experience unexpectedly refreshing. Here, no one cared about magazine covers or billion-dollar decisions. Character mattered more than status. When it was finally time to leave, Victoria thanked Ethan for lunch. He answered with his usual quiet sincerity. "You're always welcome here." Driving away beneath the golden autumn sky, Victoria realized she had spent only a few ordinary hours with Ethan and Lily, yet those simple moments had given her something extraordinary. For the first time in many years, she no longer felt like she was searching for a place to belong. She had quietly begun finding one. Over the following weeks, ordinary afternoons quietly became the most meaningful part of Victoria's schedule. Whenever her meetings ended early, she found herself driving across Columbus instead of returning to the towering glass headquarters that had once consumed every hour of her day. She never arrived with expensive gifts or unnecessary attention. Sometimes she brought fresh lemonade from a neighborhood bakery. Other days, she simply arrived with a warm smile and asked if anyone needed an extra pair of hands. Ethan welcomed her each time with the same steady kindness, never treating her differently because of her success. If she wanted to sweep the sidewalk, he handed her a broom. If she offered to organize supplies, he pointed toward the storage shelves with quiet appreciation. There were no special accommodations, no awkward compliments, and no conversations about wealth. Lily noticed the pattern long before either adult admitted it. One afternoon, while coloring pictures at the picnic table, she looked at Victoria and asked, "Do you know why birds keep coming back to the same tree?" Victoria smiled. "Why?" Lily shrugged with childlike certainty. "Because it feels safe." Ethan glanced toward his daughter before looking at Victoria, and for a brief moment, none of them spoke. The silence carried more warmth than words ever could. As autumn settled deeper across Ohio, small traditions began forming without anyone planning them. Every Friday, they shared lunch beneath the maple trees beside the garage. Every Tuesday, Victoria stopped by after visiting the Children's Education Center supported by her foundation. Every Saturday morning, Lily insisted that everyone take a short walk through the nearby community park before returning to the garage. Neighbors gradually became accustomed to seeing the elegant blonde woman helping stack toolboxes, laughing beside mechanics, or sitting on an old folding chair while listening to Lily describe another school project. Most people assumed she was simply a family friend. Victoria preferred it that way. Away from business headlines and formal introductions, she discovered how peaceful life could feel when nobody expected perfection. At Sterling Global Headquarters, however, subtle changes did not go unnoticed. Members of the executive leadership team observed that Victoria no longer stayed late every evening. She smiled more often during meetings and listened with greater patience whenever younger employees shared new ideas. One senior executive finally asked, "You seem happier lately. Did something important happen?" Victoria paused before answering. "I remembered that success should improve people's lives, including our own." The room became thoughtfully quiet. Nobody fully understood her answer, but everyone sensed its sincerity. Meanwhile, Brooks Auto Repair continued serving the neighborhood with the same honesty that had defined Ethan's career. One crisp October morning, the owner quietly gathered the mechanics before opening time. His expression was calm, but there was unmistakable sadness in his eyes. He explained that rising operating costs, declining contracts, and increasing property taxes had made it impossible to keep the garage open much longer. Unless circumstances changed, the business would close before the end of the year. The news settled over the shop like the first cold wind before winter. Some mechanics immediately worried about finding new jobs. Others stood silently, staring at the concrete floor. Ethan thanked the owner for his honesty and encouraged everyone to continue serving customers with the same care they always had. "People still trust us," he said gently. "Until the last day we are here, they deserve our best." Later that afternoon, Victoria arrived carrying a small container of homemade pumpkin muffins that Lily had requested she try baking herself. Before anyone mentioned the difficult news, she noticed the unusual quiet inside the garage. Ethan greeted her with his familiar smile, but this time she recognized the weight hidden behind it. As she looked around the shop and then back at the man who had never once asked anyone to rescue him, Victoria quietly understood that kindness alone would not solve every problem, but perhaps dignity deserved an opportunity that money alone could never buy. Victoria listened quietly as Ethan explained the situation after the last customer drove away that afternoon. He spoke without bitterness, without blaming the economy, and without criticizing anyone. "The owner did everything he could," he said while carefully returning a wrench to its place. "Sometimes good people simply face difficult seasons." Victoria looked around the familiar garage, noticing the worn workbenches, the carefully labeled tool drawers, and the walls that held years of honest labor. She knew she could purchase the entire property with a single signature. She could write one generous check before sunset and erase everyone's immediate worries. Yet as she watched Ethan continue cleaning the shop as though nothing had changed, she understood that such a gesture would solve one problem while quietly creating another. Ethan had never wanted rescue. He had always wanted the opportunity to earn his future with dignity. That evening, after returning to her office, Victoria sat alone beneath the city lights long after every executive had gone home. The blue and white bracelet rested against the polished conference table as she reflected on everything she had learned during the past several weeks. She remembered Ethan greeting every customer with patience. She remembered Lily sharing homemade lunches without expecting anything in return. She remembered the respect that filled the garage every single day. Then an idea slowly formed. It was not charity. It was recognition. The following morning, Victoria invited the director of operations and the vice president responsible for facilities management into her office. She asked them to begin a nationwide search for a regional maintenance operations manager who understood leadership through service rather than authority. They reviewed dozens of resumes from experienced supervisors and corporate candidates. When the discussion ended, Victoria quietly added one more instruction. I would also like you to visit several independent repair facilities. Observe how people lead when nobody believes they are being evaluated. Neither executive questioned the request. Over the next 2 weeks, members of the leadership team visited repair shops across central Ohio without announcing their purpose. When they arrived at Brooks Auto Repair, Ethan welcomed them exactly as he welcomed every other customer. He explained repairs clearly, introduced every mechanic by name, thanked the receptionist for keeping the schedule organized, and even paused to help an elderly customer understand routine maintenance before returning to his own work. He never tried to impress anyone because he never realized he was being observed. At the end of the visit, one executive quietly remarked to another, "He treats respect like part of the repair." The other nodded. "That cannot be taught in a management seminar." Meanwhile, Lily continued believing that life was wonderfully simple. She asked Victoria if birds became sad when trees lost their leaves. Victoria smiled and answered, "Maybe they know new leaves will come back." Lily laughed. "Daddy says hope works like that too." Those words stayed with Victoria throughout the week. A few days later, the executive committee gathered once more to review their search. Resume after resume was discussed, comparing qualifications, certifications, and years of experience. Finally, the director of operations placed one final evaluation folder on the table. It contained no prestigious business school diploma and no impressive corporate title. Instead, it described a mechanic who had quietly earned extraordinary respect from customers, co-workers, and complete strangers simply by the way he treated people every day. After reading every page, the committee exchanged thoughtful glances before reaching a unanimous decision. Across town, Ethan locked the garage at sunset exactly as he had done for years, unaware that the opportunity he had never asked for had already begun finding its way toward him. Not because someone wished to reward his hardship, but because quiet character had finally been seen by the people who understood its true value. 3 mornings later, Ethan arrived at Brooks Auto Repair expecting another ordinary day. Instead, he found a neatly addressed envelope resting on his workbench with his name written across the front. Inside was an invitation requesting his presence at Sterling Global Headquarters later that afternoon for a final leadership interview regarding a newly created regional maintenance operations manager position. Ethan read the letter twice before quietly placing it back into the envelope. He looked toward the garage owner, who smiled warmly and said, "I think somebody finally noticed what we have always known." Ethan thanked him with genuine humility, but made no assumptions. He continued changing oil, inspecting brakes, and greeting customers exactly as he had every other day. That afternoon, he arrived at the headquarters, wearing the same carefully pressed navy blazer he had worn to the charity gala. The reception staff welcomed him with respect, and guided him into a bright conference room overlooking the Columbus skyline. Members of the executive committee greeted him with friendly smiles and asked thoughtful questions, not only about mechanical knowledge, but about teamwork, customer service, and leadership. Ethan answered honestly, explaining that people remembered how they were treated long after they forgot the details of a repair. He spoke about listening before speaking, encouraging coworkers instead of competing with them, and earning trust one conversation at a time. When the interview concluded, the committee thanked him and stepped outside briefly. A few minutes later, they returned with Victoria. She smiled warmly, still wearing the familiar blue and white bracelet that had never left her wrist. The committee chair looked directly at Ethan and said, "We did not select you because someone recommended you. We selected you because every person who observed your work reached the same conclusion independently. You lead with integrity before you lead with authority." Ethan sat quietly, absorbing every word. Victoria stepped forward and handed him an official offer letter. "This opportunity belongs to you because you earned it," she said gently. "No one is giving you a favor. We are inviting the right person to help lead our team." Ethan accepted the letter with grateful eyes and replied, "Thank you for believing in someone whose office has always been a repair bay." Victoria smiled. Leadership has never depended on the size of the office. A few weeks later, after the garage closed with dignity and every employee had found new opportunities, Ethan began his new role, bringing the same quiet respect into every facility he supervised. Employees quickly discovered that their new manager remembered names, listened carefully, and never asked anyone to do work he would not gladly do himself. On a crisp autumn Saturday, Ethan, Lily, and Victoria met once again at the community park where colorful leaves drifted gently across the walking path. Lily skipped ahead, collecting bright red and golden maple leaves while laughing at every gust of wind. Ethan walked beside Victoria in comfortable silence before finally saying, "I used to think that little bracelet changed only one evening." Victoria looked down at the blue and white threads resting against her wrist and softly shook her head. "It changed much more than that. It reminded me that the greatest gifts are not measured by their price. They are measured by the hearts that create them." Lily turned around, smiling as she held up two beautiful leaves, one blue sky reflected in the lake behind her and golden sunlight surrounding the little family they had quietly become. Victoria gently reached for Ethan's hand, and he smiled back with peaceful certainty. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness does not simply brighten a single day. Sometimes it quietly leads 3 lonely hearts home.